Thursday. Thanks for joining us. Outnumbered starts now.
Fox News alert, surprising new details in the Stormy Daniels controversy. Now, Rudy Giuliani revealing President Trump reimbursed his longtime lawyer, Michael Cohen, for that $130,000 payment to the adult film star. Giuliani says the president did not know the money was going to Daniels and insists nothing illegal happened on behalf of his campaign. This is Outnumbered. I'm Sandra Smith, and here today, host of Kennedy on Fox Business, Kennedy, co-host of Fox and Friends Weekend, Abby Huntsman is here, former deputy spokesperson for the State Department and Fox News analyst Marie Harf, and joining us on the couch today, editor-in-chief of the Daily Caller News Foundation, Chris Bedford, and he is outnumbered, and I just joked that I'm sitting next to Kennedy. That means I'm going to uncontrollably giggle or laugh at some point during this hour. But welcome to everybody on the couch.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
Yeah, good to have you back. Should we get started?
Yeah.
All right, let's go. Rudy Giuliani clarifying that President Trump repaid his lawyer, Michael Cohen, for unspecified expenses, and that Mr. Trump was unaware the money was going to Daniels and did not become aware till after the case went public. The announcement raising new questions since Cohen has previously said he did not receive reimbursement for the payment. Giuliani weighing in earlier today.
He was definitely reimbursed. There's no doubt about it.
So why did he say he wasn't?
Maybe. First of all, if we had to defend this as not being a campaign contribution, I think we could do that. This was for personal reasons. This was the president had been hurt personally, not politically, personally so much, and the first lady by some of the false allegations. That one more false allegation, 6 years old. I think he was going to help the family.
Meanwhile, President Trump tweeting this morning, quote, Mr. Cohen, an attorney, received a monthly retainer, not from the campaign and having nothing to do with the campaign, from which he entered into through reimbursement, a private contract between two parties known as a non-disclosure agreement, or NDA. These agreements are very common among celebrities and people of wealth. Stormy Daniels' attorney, Michael Avenatti, firing back.
If anybody thinks that Donald Trump wrote those tweets, then they have been paying attention over the last couple years. I don't know the lawyer that wrote this. That lawyer is also a moron because now he or she has subjected the president to yet another potential lawsuit for defamation. I have never seen a group of people that cannot shoot straight. And I mean, these folks make the Watergate burglars look competent.
Chief White House correspondent John Roberts live at the White House this morning. John, things changing by the hour.
They are, Sandra, but it's pretty clear that yesterday, at some point, the president's outside attorneys, including Rudy Giuliani and Jay Sekulow, said, you know what, the best thing to do in this case is to get ahead of it, to say that this could not have been a campaign contribution because the president ultimately paid for it out of his own personal funds. And what's most interesting about this whole thing is the staff at the White House had no clue what was going on. And you can see that that might be a prudent legal strategy, because if you wall yourself off from the White House operation, you can really keep it in the realm of this being a personal payment. But there's no question it was a bombshell when Rudy Giuliani dropped it last night on Hannity. Watch as it unfolded.
They funneled it through the law firm.
Funneled through the law firm, and the president repaid it.
Oh, I didn't know he did.
Yeah.
There's no campaign finance law.
Zero.
So the president.
Just like Sean.
So this decision was made by.
Everybody was nervous about this from the very beginning. I wasn't. I knew how much money Donald Trump put into that campaign. I said, $130,000. He's going to do a couple of checks for $130,000. When I heard Cohen's retainer of $35,000, when he was doing no work for the president, I said, but that's how he's repaying. That's how he's repaying it, with a little profit and a little margin for paying taxes.
On top of this, Sandra, Giuliani is saying that the president did not know what the money was going to be used for. He basically just created a retainer fund that Michael Cohen could draw off of for expenses that never were reported back to the president. which a lot of people are finding curious. But the reason that they have done this now is they believe that the heart of the case that the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York has against Michael Cohen relates to a potential FEC, Federal Election Commission, violation of an illegal campaign fund. I had a midnight conversation with Rudy Giuliani last night, and he said to me, this takes that off the table. Now, you could probably argue legally one way or the other whether it does, in fact, or whether it just puts you in more legal jeopardy. But one thing that seems to have been illuminated is a, I don't know if you just want to say a contribution or a flat-out untrue statement. Back on February 13th, Michael Cohen, when this first became public, said neither the Trump organization nor the Trump campaign was a party to the transaction with Ms. Clifford, that's Stormy Daniels, and neither reimbursed me for the payment either directly or indirectly. Well, now we know that's not the case. Maybe it wasn't the campaign that reimbursed him, but Cohen did get reimbursed for this whole thing. I want to play one other statement from Michael Avenatti, Stormy Daniels' lawyer. I mean, he was basically doing a Snoopy dance over this whole thing this morning. Listen here.
I think our case just got exponentially better in the last 24 hours. I mean, we knew we were going to be able to prove this, but we didn't know we were going to have Rudy Giuliani appear on Sean Hannity and do it for us on a Wednesday night. The importance of this cannot be overstated. This is not about sex. This isn't about what happened between Stormy Daniels and Donald Trump in the bedroom. It's not about what happened in 2006 or 2007. I've been saying this all along. This is about a cover-up. It's about lies told the American people. It's about people trying to pull the wool over people's eyes.
So that's his perspective, and you can imagine it would be quite starkly different than the White House perspective. Giuliani, Sandra telling me last night, okay, this is going to be embarrassing, but let's take the hit, get out in front of this, and take this off the table in terms of a campaign finance violation. Sandra?
A lot to dig into there. John Roberts at the White House for us. Thank you. So Cohen said that Trump had incurred these expenses and that he paid them on his behalf, and that Giuliani this morning saying Trump was not aware that that money was then going to Stormy Daniels. What do you make of all that we're learning on this?
So Stormy Daniels and Avenatti, I think, are a side act. They've got nothing really to do with whether or not the president will be the president in a year or two, or what his legacy is going to be. And I think we've seen a shift, obviously, in the legal strategy. The first thing you see, or one of the first things you see, is Ty Cobb. He's out. And if you're on a legal team or political team and you lose an argument, then it's time for you to go home, because obviously you're not in charge. It seems like Giuliani is now in charge of this legal team. Some of the things we've seen that have happened are the leak of the Mueller questions, which seems to have been a broad attack on Mueller, and a PR campaign that says these questions are out of line, we're not going to talk about them. And then we see the Cohen thing. He's probably told the president that your lawyer has now been raided. He's being possibly investigated for bank fraud. This is somebody who is on your side. He's under attack. We need to go after him. We need to get clear of the campaign finance rules. We need to get clear of the bank fraud stuff. And we need to trace down where this money came from. It seems just like a new aggressive strategy from the Trump legal team led by Giuliani.
Kennedy, what's going on here?
If you can't pay off a porn star in this country, these are no longer the United States of America. Number one. Number two, I think that, you've got two Giulianis here. You've got the brilliant legal mind, the tough prosecutor, the shrewd politician who can be very helpful to the president. But then you have the Rudy Giuliani who lacks self-awareness, who tends to shoot from the hip and says things that, perhaps he intended to say that Michael Cohen had been paid off. And I think part of that was weighing the potential campaign finance violations versus the president's reputation for being ensconced with someone like Miss Clifford. Right. And they realized that the campaign finance issue, that may be the bigger legal fish that they got to reel in. So Giuliani was trying to take care of that. But at the same time, he opens up the president to so much more skepticism and criticism by saying that Michael Cohen was there to take care of these things. And that's what's problematic, is that there might be other things like this that were paid for by the wolf, by the cleaner. Yes. And if there's a pattern of that, that's what I would be concerned with. Not Stormy Daniels. Go away, Michael Avenatti, please.
Oh, he is, I think John Roberts said it right. He's doing a Snoopy dance all day today. This is exactly what he has wanted this whole time. Isn't there a messaging problem, though? And I think think John Roberts alluded to that. It seems like President Trump and his team, they have been behind continuously when it comes to the Stormy Daniels story. Why not 2 months ago when it became public and then President Trump realized where that money ultimately went? Why not come out then and articulate and be transparent with the American people exactly what went on, exactly what he knew, and articulate that with the White House? Because there's got to be a frustration in the White House right now. They're doing their jobs every day. They are trying to do their best, and yet they seem out of the loop on a lot of these things.
Well, John Roberts said that. He said the White House staff did not know last night that Rudy Giuliani was going to go on Hannity's show and basically put this out there. So now, all day today, this is the story we're talking about, right? It's a self-inflicted wound in some ways. We now have 4 or 5 different stories about whether Cohen got repaid. Yes or no, whether the president knew. When did he know? What did he know? And Kennedy's right. It was interesting. Rudy said, yeah, there was this almost like, he didn't use this term, but sort of like a slush fund where the president just kept paying to Michael Cohen to take care of issues. So are there other issues? And like Abby said, without being transparent with this drip, drip, drip and the changing stories, they open themselves up to a credibility issue.
So what about what's the politics to this? What's the threat here? Bank fraud would be a threat. Campaign finance, breaking the campaign finance laws would be a threat. But if you go to the average Trump voter and say, what if I told you Donald Trump was with a porn star? Is that going to change their vote in the elections? I think he's trying to get ahead of what the politics
We'll see how women vote. We'll see how independent women vote in the midterm.
But that's why they waited, and that's why he realized that if you're going to change your story, it's much more important. Instead of having a forceful moralist denial, like, oh, these allegations are disgusting, they really have to answer around that aspect quite carefully, because I think most people don't care. But it doesn't matter whether or not you care. The legality of the campaign finance issue, that is the much bigger picture.
All right. Well, meanwhile, Rudy Giuliani also weighing in on a potential in-person interview between President Trump and Special Counsel Robert Mueller as part of the Russia probe. Giuliani telling John Roberts in a radio interview that he believes the special counsel is desperate to make a case against the president and that he worries about a potential perjury trap, but adding a sit-down could still be possible if Mueller narrows the scope of questioning and agrees to a time limit of 2 to 3 hours. Giuliani also saying this on Hannity last night.
I would like to get one not under oath. I'd want it videotaped, and not videotaped, but audio taped. I want to make sure they don't misrepresent his answers. But this is an outrageous miscarriage of justice.
All this coming at a pivotal time for the president's legal team. Ty Cobb, who represents the commander-in-chief in the Russia probe, is retiring at the end of the month and will be replaced by Emmett Flood, who served as counsel for former President Bill Clinton during impeachment proceedings back in 1998. So desperate to make a case against Trump, he says Robert Mueller is. What do you think?
Well, I think that's why Giuliani probably directed the leaking of this by somebody outside the legal team. We don't know that for sure, but it seems likely, because if you look at Mueller's questions, and he's in charge of investigating whether or not there was collusion between the campaign and the Russian government to put Donald Trump in the White House and then do favors for Russia. You look at this, it's 2 days worth of questions when you tack on all the add-ons, and most of them were like, what were you thinking when you saw this WAPO article?
Yeah.
What were you thinking? Why did you say this in an interview with Maria Bartiromo about not liking James Comey? Why'd you do this? None of it has to do, or only maybe one question has to do with actual collusion. And Giuliani is going to say, let's rein this back in and let's actually define some parameters.
But see, this is what's so interesting about Rudy Giuliani's media strategy over the last 24 hours. He has a real job and a big job in dealing with the Mueller investigation. It's not to go out and explain the Stormy Daniels payment. So just from a Rudy Giuliani perspective, he really, I think, should focus on that, should focus on getting this new attorney, Emmett Flood, up to speed. He has to go through all these documents they've already produced, which will take a long time. And I think trying to negotiate terms of an interview in the public is not likely to endear him to Mueller.
The problem is you can't go do an interview. If you're Giuliani, you can't go do an interview and they not ask about and that goes back to the messaging problem.
I know.
I do think you're right, Chris. We have seen a different strategy with the new attorneys around President Trump, a lot more aggressive. They are basically fighting this thing until the very end. They're not going to do anything they don't want to do. I think the American people, for the most part, want this to be over with, especially the Trump supporters. They want to get back to daily business. There's so much going on in the world. They're telling themselves, let's just move on. Let's focus on the most important issues of the day. I think the biggest question that will be asked, Sandra, is about Paul Manafort. And Napolitano was saying this morning. Did the president know of any efforts between Paul Manafort and the Russian government to impact the election in some way. That is where the collusion is still involved in this whole conversation. And can the president answer that? I don't know what the answer would be.
It's really interesting you talk about the American people just wanting to move on from this, and they see the problems that we have, like North Korea, for example, and this potential upcoming summit with the president. And Rudy Giuliani made that case this morning. He's saying he's got to be preparing for this potential meeting with Kim Jong-un. I can't be preparing him for what he says is silly deposition. Listen to this.
This is the President of the United States. He's getting ready to negotiate probably one of our most historic agreements, and we have to go there and prepare him for this silly deposition about a case in which he supposedly colluded with the Russians, but there's no evidence of that? I mean, everybody forgets the basis of the case is dead.
Kennedy?
What would you rather have the president focusing his energy on?
North Korea.
And I think, you know, that's a very valid question. I am one of the people, I believe that the president should sit down for this as a politician, and in order to get the whole thing just out of the way. I agree that, you know, those interview questions, whoever leaked them, for what reason, you know, who knows, but there are way too many, would take way too long. Hillary Clinton sat with the FBI for what, 3.5 hours? I think that's a fair amount of time.
Ultimately, the big question is, do you want to see the president sit down and answer these questions of Robert Mueller?
I think it would make for some good TV, but it wouldn't be a good legal strategy for the president to actually sit down with these investigators. The president doesn't necessarily do well in the past when he's talking to lawyers, when he's held on the record, when
precise answers are required.
Precise answers are required. It's kind of funny to read through some of the legal transcripts in the past of the president sitting down and being opposed by lawyers, because he does contradict himself, and he's a little too freewheeling. He lacks the precision in that kind of conversation when you're facing perjury. So if they said it wasn't a charge where you could be perjured on this, and you could have a conversation with the president, that might make a little more sense.
Interesting.
He may not have a choice, though.
He may not have a choice. And some of these are only questions he can answer. And if we want Mueller's probe to wrap up, and we really do want the truth about what happened in 2016.
What were you thinking when you went to bed on May 16th?
Well, no, but more the
How
question.
did you feel when James Comey talked about
No one wants to
get into find and understand.
No, but more, what did you know about the meeting in
Those things
Trump
aren't
Tower?
illegal.
What
But
do you
even
mean, my buddy
even if
Comey?
even if Robert Mueller says, how did you feel about James Comey's statements? And if the president said, he's a jerk, he's a giant giraffe, jerk-face idiot, that's not illegal. What's the point of a question like that?
I'm not saying that's a good question, but some of the questions, what did you know about the meeting in Trump Tower? What did you know about when WikiLeaks had Hillary's emails? Those kinds of questions are very pertinent to the question of Russian interference, and I think we have a right to know the answers.
Did Marie just get last word again? She has.
No, you keep saying that I have this. I don't know how I do it.
She's practicing for her radio show.
Oh, Abby got last word. She got it. Okay.
Sorry, Marie.
Let's leave it there. President Trump signaling a potential deal to help 3 Americans held captive in North Korea to get back home. What this could mean ahead of his planned summit with the North Korean dictator.
This is shaping up to be a gesture of goodwill by the North Koreans, and kudos to the president for working diligently to get them.
President Trump hinting there may soon be news on those 3 Americans being held captive in North Korea. Regional reports claim the rogue regime has released these 3 Korean-American men from a labor camp, but that they are still in the Pyongyang area. President Trump tweeting last night. As everybody is aware, the past administration has long been asking for 3 hostages to be released from a North Korean labor camp, but to no avail. Stay tuned. The State Department says it cannot confirm the reports on the detainees, which come as Trump's national security team met yesterday to discuss his planned summit with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders on Fox & Friends just this morning spoke about both the detainees and the summit.
Certainly that would be an incredible step and certainly a sign of goodwill moving into the summit, moving into these discussions with North Korea. Certainly things are moving forward and moving forward quickly. And as the president said earlier this week, we expect something to be out soon on more details revolving that meeting.
This is a fascinating but still tenuous situation, and these Korean Americans are not on American soil. They have not been fully released. So what happens with this?
Yeah, we have no idea if they will be released.
Right. Yeah.
It all comes from a South Korean journalist who's got some connections to the North and who said that they've been moved from a labor camp. That's a good sign. they probably will be released because Kim's actually facing nuclear annihilation at the end of his regime, and it's easy for him to get a little more status when he releases 3 new prisoners, especially since everything he's done so far, unlike his predecessor, going to the Olympics, he's still keeping labor camps of hundreds of thousands of people. He's still going through all the same steps that his father went through when he said, yeah, I'll knock down a reactor, some journalists can come in, I want a nuclear-free world. But he's getting applause and plaudits, and the Washington Post is calling his sister glamorous, and all these things, so something's changed. But I think the main difference that we're going to face in these negotiations, if it happens, is he doesn't get a visit from Bill Clinton. That's not the cherry at the end of the road here for him. What is at the end of the road here is the threat of total war from President Donald Trump. And if he needs to survive these 4 to 8 years if he wants to be alive.
Well, he's getting a visit with the president at the beginning of the negotiations, so he's getting that up front, and that's something.
Pledging to denuclearize.
Well, the regime has pledged that multiple times in the past, and they've never followed through. So we have to take the pledges with a grain of salt until we see concrete action.
But
getting
these releasing the hostages,
right.
Isn't that concrete action? I mean, isn't that something tangible that shows so far this has been much more of a success than?
So that would definitely be a good sign, and I want all of us to be careful, and I think there's been some reporting to have people be a little more careful that until they're out of North Korea, at the last minute, this regime is so crazy they could change their minds. This happened when we had a couple folks released during the last 8 years. Once they're out, I think this will be a very good sign that there's some positive momentum heading into this summit. But I think we do have to be cautiously optimistic about what will come out of this. This is the start of a long process of negotiation.
But I think the president has made that very clear. He's set certain expectations about what's going on. He said, look, we all hope for the best, and everyone should, this is not even political,
right.
Everyone should be cheering for this
Absolutely.
Success. But he is saying if North Korea does not follow through on denuclearizing their country, and if they don't follow through on some of the things that we're asking for, I think one of them are these prisoners, we're going to walk away from that table. But imagine how powerful that image would be after the summit if the president were to fly home with these prisoners. You know, that could be a huge moment, but not just history between North Korea and America and the world, but doing something that, as you said, Chris, administrations have tried to do for years and years. What's different? Everyone's waiting for something to be fishy here, because not all of it adds up. It was like 6 months ago we were going to an all-out war with North Korea. What I do think has changed is now Kim Jong-un can say he has fulfilled the dream of his dad and his granddad. They have now built up their nuclear program. So now we can open up to the West. That's something they've tried to do for a very long time.
I hear a lot of skepticism from you, Marie, and rightly so. I think everybody on the couch was, and everybody in the world is watching on and has reasons to be skeptical of this. However, to get to this point, do you credit the president for getting us to the point that we are at now?
I do. Absolutely. And I think that...
What is he doing differently that past administrations haven't been able to do?
So I think that his threat, I mean, like you said, the threat of nuclear annihilation, I've said before here that the sort of Mad theory of world politics doesn't always work, but here it might have worked a little bit.
It works with Mad Men,
I think Kim Jong-un is convinced that Donald Trump will attack North Korea to protect the United States.
And the steps that the U.S. takes before a major attack, the kind of things where people go silent, where communication is broken, where the military is just in a prone position to attack, have been taken by this administration.
But the
North Korea notices. It's frightening.
That's right. But the opposite theory of the case is that Kim Jong-un actually feels like he has a position of strength. He's now tested missiles that can reach the United States, he says. They're pretty far along in their nuclear and missile programs, and that he is now offering to give things up, but that's not a genuine offer, and that they're going to keep trying to trick us like they always have.
But don't underestimate the role of China in all of this either.
Absolutely.
President Trump, a lot of people are giving him credit, where I think it's deserved, on putting more pressure on China, where they stopped delivering oil and gas.
Marginalizing China from these discussions between the North and the South, and we're not talking about China at all right now in regards to the diplomacy and the peace process, because
they're the most
China has the entire time been appeasing North Korea. They have been allowing them to have this nuclear proliferation and starve their own people. I mean, what they've done is not only immoral, it's criminal.
Yeah, that's right.
And the military is coming for them. They don't want that in their border.
No, I think, you know, that with the sanctions, the fear, the realization that this could be the end, plus the sanctions perhaps finally working.
But also, this is classic art of the deal, Kennedy, right? You throw everything you can at the wall, and you hope that you get something out of nothing.
It's the art of the Donald, isn't it, Chris?
It is.
We'll see it.
Available now.
We'll see how it ends.
Yeah.
Well, there is an epic showdown looming in the midterms as President Trump and Republicans turn up the heat on Montana's Democratic Senator John Tester, hoping to derail his re-election bid. So could red state Democrats like Tester be vulnerable in November? Plus, there's new fallout from that migrant caravan at the U.S. border. Now, Attorney General Jeff Sessions sending in reinforcements and a new warning.
People are not going to caravan or otherwise stampede our border.
In Congress, Nancy Pelosi, Schumer, they've opposed us at every stop.
President Trump at his Michigan rally last Saturday slamming Democrats for blocking his agenda. Now a senior White House official telling Fox News the president and his political team plan to target red state Democrats in midterm Senate races, casting them as obstructionists who are blocking his nominees. The three Democratic senators specifically named Heidi Heitkamp in North Dakota, Joe Manchin in West Virginia, and Joe Donnelly in Indiana, with the list expected to grow. But the advisor cautioned that this is just one part of their overall political strategy. And that strategy, what do you think of that strategy?
Well, they are obstructionists, but the problem is they're also campaigning in their home states. There's never been an election where the party in power has so many seats in the opposition that are up for grabs, ever in U.S. history. And Mitch McConnell right now, as Senate Majority Leader, is allowing these senators to work less than half a week. And he's letting them go home and campaign. He's letting them go home and campaign. So now the president can say, hey, why aren't you confirming my nominees? He should also look to the Senate Republicans and say, why are you allowing these guys who are under threat of losing their seats to go home, spend 4 days raising money in California and Massachusetts, campaigning in their home states that Trump won, and not confirming any of the Trump appointees and not letting his government run? They should be working 7 days a week through August, and D.C. in August is terrible.
Isn't it a good thing, Abby, you think, to have the president getting this involved in the midterms? Yeah. What do you think?
It's a good question, and a lot of it depends on what the mood is in those particular states or particular districts, because they're all very different. But the three that you mentioned, like West Virginia, for example, he's still very well liked in some of these places. And so if you're Joe Manchin, that's a tough place to be campaigning. Maria, I'd love your thoughts on what the message is, because if you are a Democrat campaigning in a red state, and you're not there doing the job, or you're just obstructing, as President Trump is blaming them for, what are you trying to get votes off of what you're doing?
Well, a lot of these red state Democrats have voted for a lot of the president's nominees. They have tried to vote with him when they felt like they could. And what's interesting is, in West Virginia, for example, Joe Manchin is a popular ex-governor who is very moderate, and he's going up against a Republican field. There's 3 candidates in the primaries. We saw this week a debate that we held here on Fox, none of whom are perfect candidates, right? All of whom are very flawed candidates. That's why you see the national Republicans very concerned that in a lot of these states, they haven't found candidates that are strong enough to take on someone like a Joe Manchin, who is pretty popular, who has voted with the president on a number of occasions.
It's tough, Kennedy. I talked to Karl Rove over the weekend, and it reminded him back in, I think, 2006. Remember when George W. Bush was in that same place where he wasn't as popular in some places. So you have to be very strategic in the White House about places that you do go and don't go, because that can have a real impact on the ultimate results.
Yeah, absolutely. And in some places, the president's message and what he campaigned on is still very popular, even if the president himself is polarizing. And that's why they have to find the balance between using his personality and using those critical issues, especially in states where there's a good deal of optimism, but they have yet to feel the economic reality of an improving economy elsewhere.
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, another Democrat President Trump has been targeting lately, Montana Senator Jon Tester, for pushing allegations that helped derail the nomination of his VA Secretary nominee, Dr. Ronnie Jackson. Well, now Republicans hoping to topple Tester's re-election bid, seeing the red state Democrat as vulnerable in November. The Senate GOP's campaign arm began airing a statewide ad yesterday highlighting Mr. Trump's charge that Tester's actions were a disgrace. Watch this.
Spreading flat-out lies.
And Tester started throwing out things that he's heard.
Is a disgrace to Montana.
What Jon Tester did to this man is a disgrace.
Trump is right. It's time for Jon Tester to go.
Republican groups also focusing on Tester's support for legislation protecting sanctuary cities and his ties to his party's liberal wing. Like Senator Elizabeth Warren, they sent out a fundraising email for the Montana Democrat. No one even knew who Jon Tester was, by the way, until a couple weeks ago. Chris, I'd love your thoughts on this one, because you think about Jon Tester and his strategy where he could have gone quietly to the White House behind closed doors, say, I have concerns about Ronnie Jackson. Can you take a look at this, and then we can see if we want to have a hearing or not. He dragged Ronnie Jackson through the mud so publicly. You can understand why the president's upset, why a lot of people are upset with the way he handled that. Should he be concerned in Montana?
It's possible because Montana's a strange state. Montana's got ranchers, cowboys.
It's a lovely state.
It is beautiful.
It's a beautiful state.
It's also got a lot of hippies, environmentalists. It's a strange mix of people in Montana, and they're very independent-minded. So
but Trump won that state by 20 points, didn't he?
Exactly, but they've always shown that they're willing to vote for both liberals and conservatives on the same ballot, which is kind of strange. Tester probably overreached here because he attacked a rear admiral and he attacked his honor, and he attacked him in ways that were shameful. The kind of accusations that you have to go home and explain to your children, not just, oh, well, he did this or that. These were very personal. And then the Secret Service came out and said, this isn't a real thing.
That one of them isn't true. This is the challenge.
That's not true. There were two.
This is
the car wrecks and the hotel. The Secret Service said they had no record of either of those.
Well, here's the challenge for John Tester.
I mean, that's an issue. Like if you're going out and you're going to be the savior, you better be right. If you're going to throw bombs and do something that salacious in a hyper-politicized environment like this, you better be damn straight you've got your facts.
He had 20 anonymous sources,
well, but
no names.
But these anonymous sources are current and former service members who have served with Ronnie Jackson, who came to Senator Tester as the ranking member. Senator Tester has voted for every single one of Donald Trump's VA nominees. He has put forward 8 bills regarding the VA that Donald Trump has signed. So John Tester has a strong record of supporting veterans, which I think he will be talking about during the campaign. If the White House had properly vetted Ronnie Jackson, they would have found these accusations on their own. If they weren't true, they could have fact-checked them. So when they came out...
If he were the Candyman, if he were so compromised, why did President Obama, your hero and savior, why did he love him? Why did he speak of him in such glowing terms? If you're going to work for 3 presidents, you have been vetted. And the issue is not his character, his credibility. The issue is, can a person... But going out in public and saying that he was the Candyman and the implications of that.
Right, you have people's lives on the line. I think that is the bigger part of this whole thing.
And
was that the right way to handle it?
Of running a giant behemoth.
Right. That's the
government
question to ask.
agency with 13 million dependent veterans who need it to run smoothly and have choices for their health care.
Because, Marie, people would say
the
way that John Tester handled that is exactly what people hate about politics.
I think he felt a responsibility with service members coming to him with these concerns.
But then why not go back to the White House and say, I've got these concerns, I don't want to ruin this guy's life.
So the committee chair and a number of other Republicans did go to the White House over concerns about these allegations and concerns that Ronnie Jackson was not being honest with them in their meetings about whether he had been part of an IG report. Ronnie Jackson was far from a perfect candidate, and John Tester, I think, did what he believed was the right thing to do to help the VA. We may argue about whether he should have done it publicly, but when we're talking about his re-election campaign, I actually think he'll be.
But also, what does it say about the media, Chris? You could just throw out allegations with all these anonymous sources.
Oh, we do that on a lot of issues.
They do, but they run with it. Is this a reminder, too, to be more careful, more thoughtful about things like that?
Well, the media's gone off the rails. They're terrible. They always assume malice, and that's one thing that you cannot do in journalism. You have to think, is there another explanation for this? Why wouldn't this have come out? The bottom line here is that Senator Tester played vicious and personal politics, and it looks like he might have lost on this one.
Well, the liberal wing of the Democratic Party is embracing. Did you see the letter that Senator Warren sent on his behalf asking for money?
That's not helpful.
He reminds me a lot of my big brothers back in Oklahoma, and it's not just the flat top haircut. He's not going to let himself get bullied by anyone, not even the president.
And if you're talking about a politically interesting and diverse state like Montana, love notes from Liz Warren don't necessarily help your ultimate cause.
I agree with that. All right, watch that state closely and all the other ones. Coming up, Attorney General Jeff Sessions showing he means business. The big announcement from the nation's top law enforcer on the migrants in that caravan seeking asylum, the message it sends, and whether it will be enough. Back after this.
We are not going to let this country be overwhelmed. We're sending a message worldwide.
The reinforcements are on their way. Attorney General Jeff Sessions beefing up legal resources at the California border to help deal with that caravan of migrants trying to enter the country. Sessions saying the team of judges and prosecutors will help stem the backlog of cases and send a message that the nation's laws will be enforced. So far, more than 50 asylum seekers from the caravan have crossed into the U.S. from the border entry near San Diego, according to the group's organizers. So Chris Bedford, Attorney General Sessions, is sending 35 additional U.S. attorneys and 18 immigration judges to help stem the tide and deal with the people, but it's really not that high of a number coming over the border.
Well, it's not the number of people that really matters. It's only 50. It's the point that the organizers of this caravan had. They were trying to do a legal challenge to the U.S. They're saying, we're coming, we're coming. They had cameras on it. They had media down there. And they're trying to make the case that economic immigrants are refugees. And this is the same thing that happened, or asylum seekers. It's the same thing that happened in Europe, where the liberals won on this, the left won, where they made the case that these people who are fleeing Turkey or Central Africa were coming because they were being massacred by ISIS, when ISIS was only actually in one place. And because of that, the Europeans said, oh my gosh, we can't let this happen, and they let in a million people.
Massacred by narco-terrorists, by these drug cartels who have a stranglehold on these countries economically and politically, and you know their way of life, their standard of living is incredibly low and depressing.
So there are criminals in these countries, but that doesn't mean, does that mean it's the United States' responsibility to take everyone from that country in and say, you know what, now you're an American citizen because people in your country are criminals?
We have a process for asylum seekers in this country
Exactly.
still on the books, and they can apply for asylum if they show up at the border. And some of those criteria that
they have to be vetted and they have to make a case and prove.
How do you do that though? How can you actually know? Because you hear these stories, and Kennedy says they're heartbreaking. It's really sad to see what goes on, and there's a reason why they often skip Mexico and come straight here, because we still are the best country in the world.
Well, they didn't really, because they started as 1,700 and were whittled down to 150. So 90% of them were gobbled up, you know, by Mexico along the way. So many of them did, in fact, stay in Mexico.
But that's the big problem in the process, is how do you identify those that really are seeking asylum and those that aren't?
So that's the challenge that we have at the border, right? Is that
will this be helpful?
Well, I think that this is not helpful or hurtful to that cause, but I think there are probably some legitimate asylum seekers, and that in this country there is still a process to apply for asylum and to seek it, and we cannot let that fall by the wayside, because there are people who are legitimately persecuted in their own countries, and as of now, you can still come here seeking asylum.
And there are also rich Americans going to vacation in all of these countries. I mean, it's not like
that doesn't change the status of the law.
I don't know, man. I'd rather go to Hawaii than Honduras.
Honduras is nice.
They have some lovely
news.
It's pretty and it's closer.
Well, depends on where you are and where you're lying from. You know what? We need better laws and a more comprehensive immigration policy in this country. Nancy, who? Nancy, a growing number of Democrats and candidates reportedly saying they need fresh leadership. They're distancing themselves from the House Minority Leader. Could it be? Is Nancy out?
A growing number of Democratic candidates calling for new leadership on the heels of Pelosi saying she will run for the Speaker post should her party retake the House. So far, 10 Democratic candidates reportedly have said that they would oppose Pelosi's return to the speakership, while at least another 10 have conspicuously declined to express support for her, according to the Washington Post. All this as Republicans appear to be salivating at the chance of the liberal San Francisco Democrat staying in the picture. Says an RNC spokesman, quote, "There's no politician in America who's more disliked than Nancy Pelosi. Any Democrat running in 2018 should be panicking that she wants to be Speaker again." Maria, I see you out of the corner of my eye. I know you.
I'm ready.
Are you
ready.
tired of talking about Nancy Pelosi?
Yes.
I mean,
would you like to see someone right now?
but she's not tired of herself, and she's putting herself out there, Marie.
Okay, all joking aside, what I don't want to happen is her legacy. Look, she was the first female speaker. She's been an enormous fundraiser, an enormously successful leader for the party. But I think it's clear that many members of the caucus believe it's time for new leadership. And so what I don't want to happen is the Democrats retake the House and we're all happy, and then there's this really nasty leadership fight that puts Speaker Pelosi into a position where she could have exited leadership in a better way. So I think that you're going to see a lot more candidates and current members like Kathleen Rice come out and say that it's time for new leadership, especially because the Republicans are going to be getting new leadership.
Every time
Paul Ryan's leaving.
That, though, every time they say that, she jumps back in front of the camera like, "I'm still here, boys," and she will not go away. I mean, there was a story the other day that if, in fact, Democrats take over the House, which they certainly could in the midterms, that she's going to step aside and allow young Joe Kennedy to take the reins
She'd probably burn down the house before she gave up the front door keys. She would make accusations of sexism against her own party members if they try to come after her. It'd probably be very similar to how difficult it was to dislodge Debbie Wasserman Schultz from the DNC when she prepared accusations. But she prepared accusations. Well, once she got busted by the leaks, but before that, she had prepared accusations of anti-Semitism to use against her own party.
Nancy Pelosi has been much more successful. By the way, I mean, she was the first female speaker.
She raises a lot of money in Cambridge,
money,
San Francisco, New York, which is the entirety of America.
But wait. Let me finish. I believe for the party that it is probably time for new leadership.
What would you like to see
heading into 2020, particularly? I really like Joe Crowley.
I was going to say, what about Joe Crowley here in New York?
But guess what? Like Joe Crowley.
He'd, like many others, say they're not going to run against her because she's been there for so long. She's got to make a decision. Is it about myself or is it about the future of the Democratic Party?
Or
it's kind of like the Clinton problem, too. If the Democratic Party wants to be successful, they've got to move on without some of these voices. They've got to have a new start.
But don't underestimate her ability to fundraise.
I agree, and she's still fundraising. But she would get a lot of credit in the party if we take back the House and she says, I'm going to help figure out who the next leader is. It would make her beloved in the party.
Yeah, if she said, I'm going to focus my energy on raising money, that would be a much more popular.
Yes, absolutely.
You don't get to
She
say
likes
nothing
power.
for her, then.
She likes power.
We all do, man.
We'll be right back. More Outnumbered in just a moment.